So let's start. The whole the whole point of design. Well, the subject is unfurl your sails, and by virtue of what I do for a living, I love it. But it's also my living. Well, I breathe, I live design, right? And what's the point of it? That's something that I constantly wondered. It's something that I constantly ask myself. It's a question that my team constantly has to deal with every single day. What is the point of what we're doing? Why are we doing this? Right? So, a design historian has claimed very, very interestingly, that the ultimate purpose of design is to contribute to the creation of a good society. Do we all agree? Yes, I definitely do. Which is why every time that I sit to talk to my team, every lineup meeting that we have, every dialogue that we have, every time that we sit to discuss a story idea, whether it's a new initiative that we want to take, whether we, like an initiative that we want to launch, or whether it's a story that we want to explore. It's something that we deal with every day. We're constantly talking to each other about it. We're constantly asking each other what it is that we want to achieve with what we're doing. What more can we give our readers? What more can we teach our readers, right? So we're constantly engaged with the idea of doing good for the people that we're talking to, right? So that's the whole idea. Now, when you ask these questions, the whole point of, again, asking the questions also is the answers. And that's important. You need to pay attention to the answers, because that is your intention. That is what you want to set out to do. And I believe that if you don't ask questions, you don't get any answers, there's no drive to move forward or to do something better, right? So what's important is what we want to do with those answers that we get, right? What is design? Well, design, to me, again, is a point of view, okay? Um, it's my take on something. It's my idea. It's my choice. It's my opinion. So it's a point of view that I have about something. Um, Now, there's an architect who's also a professor of design theory. Very interesting. He's also made a very, very interesting comment that, you know what, you don't need me or him or anybody else to tell you what design is. We all know, or rather we all think we know what design is, right? It is, well, it's our opinion, right? Usually what happens is so the process of the magazine, we start with a lineup meeting where we're discussing ideas. We move on to a market recce stage where the team goes out, checks out what's there on the shelves, what's available, what our designers are doing. We basically scour the market. It's called the recce period. And then we get to the execution stage. Now, when we get to the execution stage, a lot of times we realize that what we started out with isn't really what we're actually doing. And that's really interesting, because that shows that we're actually doing something that's not just theoretical. We're doing something that's also very applicable. And again, that is important. The fact that we realize that and we change the way we think to meet what's going on out there, that's important, right? So now, by definition, and I'm going to read this out, design is an idea that holds the possibility of changing the way we live. The whole idea that we're going to be engaged in living better than we lived yesterday, doesn't that excite you? Right? So in that sense, it is very much a part of our fiber of evolution, the way we live, the way we want to live, our aspiration. They all come together to make the design of tomorrow, right? Now, design as we know it today is not just about objects. Agree? It's, it's entire systems today that are subjects of design. We're changing processes, and that is also design. It's not just, hey, you know what, I designed this washing machine, it's my design. No, it's also the way we use the washing machine. The best example I can give you is the smartphone. It's a phone. It's the way we use it and the way it works that's smart. So it's the entire system, okay, that is, well, part of the process of design today. Now, one of my very, very favorite reference points is this curator of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Paola Antonelli. So very interestingly, Paola has stated that, the whole idea of form following function, where does that come from? So you usually tend to think of something new or wanting to create something new when you have a need for it, or when you have a function that isn't being performed correctly or the way you like by something, right? So you think of a design that will perform that function for you. So essentially, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. That's how we did look at it until a few years ago, right? But now, a lot of it has changed. We're looking at design as its own, well, entity, not being, but really entity, right? So essentially what Paola says, and I'm going to read out her quote, right? So she said, one of the most exciting and important trends that we're seeing today is the evolving process of the purpose of design. It's lesser and lesser about function as an endpoint and more about access to networks. Increasingly, designs are becoming gateways to different ways of doing things, different ways of actually living, okay? I'll explain that to you with an example that she herself has given. Now, my parents' generation, my grandparents, my parents, they all believed in buying cars. They bought cars, right? There was use for cars, and so they bought the cars. Now, that generation bought more cars than the young generation today. Why? Because our generation, and then obviously yours because you're following, we believe in the convenience of the object, right? We need a car to take us from point A to point B. We don't really see the need or the necessity to spend on a car that we own ourselves. We're okay with sharing. We're okay with carpools. It is the age of the carpool. What has that led to? Any guesses? It's the age of Uber. It's the age of Ola. I mean, we're totally okay with, using somebody else's car as long as we go from point A to point B, and that's what we set out to do, right? That's essentially what design does. It helps us to evolve and change the way we live to suit our current needs, okay? Now, are you guys familiar with the Fibonacci? Right? So the question that we come to, with this entire discussion about what is design and all of that, really, is this new? Is this whole concept or movement of design recent? No, it's not. Design's existed forever. Even, well, the Fibonacci sequence is something that was discovered very, very early on. But even before that, the Fibonacci existed in nature, right? The snail's shell, the conch, there were examples of the spiral that existed. Now, does that mean that it's rules that we follow when it comes to design? How do we work along with design? How do we work with that thought in our heads? Are there rules? No, really, there are no rules. Where I come from, and honestly, because we're constantly dealing with people directly, I'm constantly working with the end user directly, there are no rules, other than the fact that the design needs to work for you, right? So at this point, ask yourselves, is study then important? Do we need to study design? Yes, we do. Why? Because it helps you give an edge to your talent, to your craft. It gives it an efficiency that otherwise you would, well, like me, spend years gaining, right, as experience. So again, very, very interestingly, there was a study that was, well, an experiment that was done in one of the design schools abroad, where the teacher set out to ask her students what is it exactly that you're studying design for? Why are you studying design? Right? She expected a very fixed set of questions, essentially that, they're creative people and, we want to learn design because, hey, that's us think better, all of that. What was the answer that she got? More than 60% of her students replied that they were studying design for better job prospects. It was as practical as that. They wanted to study it because they wanted better jobs. And they're not wrong. It's true. There's a survey that shows that workers with a design element in their role, in their job profile, are 41% more productive than the average worker, right? So it's nice. It gives you a hook, a perspective. It kind of channels your thought. It makes you think a certain way. It makes you look at things differently, right? It makes you want to change things around to suit you. Am I a certified designer? No, I'm not. Is anyone on my team a certified? Have we studied design? Have any of us studied design? No. But there's interest, there's passion, we've also had the best teacher ever. Yes, without really studying it, we've had the best teacher ever, and it's called experience. We've learned by being directly in touch with people what they want. We've worked on what we thought they wanted. We've asked them if that was relevant to them. I mean, there's been a lot of back and forth in these 19 years that I've spent in this industry, and I will say this, that if I was given the option, I would have studied it, because I know today that there's a lot of things that I would have done differently, right? But having said that, how do we study? Every day, at work, on the job, is an education. And how do we do this? With constant discussions. There's a constant dialogue that's going on with my team. There's a constant, interaction. We're constantly, discussing things. We fight like cats and dogs, and there's nothing very editor-like about me when I'm fighting with my team. We're also hurling abuses at each other. We point to the door and tell them to leave and come back later. I leave the room a lot of times and then come back a lot later. But I think that's also a very, very important part of the journey of design. It's a conversation. It's not a monologue. It's a conversation, because I need to know what you're thinking. I need to know what you want. I need to know how I can give you that, and if you're going to be okay with what I'm suggesting to you, right? That's the important bit about design. It needs to be something that if you don't need, then you want. The aspiration also needs to be there. So that's very importantly, again, connecting me to another thought, okay? A lot of people, a lot of designers themselves say that democracy is not necessarily that good for design, right? Because everyone giving their ideas doesn't really make it work. You've heard of, the proverb, too many cooks spoil the broth. It's not possible to use all these various points of view and move on. You have to kind of narrow it down, and yes, that's where I step in. That's where I'm the voice of reason. When I tell them, okay, no, this doesn't work, this works, this doesn't work, this works, right? But the important thing is that as a team we're discussing, we're evolving the idea that's born out of one person through discussion, through debate, through deliberation, and then we arrive at something that is relevant. Again, that's very, very important. Relevance is important. Okay, not very clear, but it's one of my favorite quotes. People ignore design that ignores them. It's very, very important. If you're a designer, if you're working in the field, your design needs to be relevant. It's one of the things I learned while we were working on the GoodHomes show. And mind you, this was a complete blind step that we took. In an age where we're all going technology, we're thinking OTT platforms for our movies and stuff. We're thinking digital. We went television, right? It was not the most wise choice on our part. A lot of people told us, why aren't you looking at a web series? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? No, we want to connect with the people because we do believe that what you do needs to be relevant, right? And to me, I think that paid off. Now, very importantly, it's necessary also for us to understand that a lot of brands today are veering towards invisible design, okay? Brands like Apple, IKEA, well, also Google. We're looking at a very simple user interface which kind of enhances the user process. Again, that's something that you need to look at as students, very intently, because it's a very important comment, because it's a system and it simplifies our lives. Things are complicated enough anyway. Let's simplify things, right? So today, design is as important to every part of our lives, including our business, professional, personal, all parts of our lives. It's important. It's a part of our fiber, right? So it needs to evolve. It needs to change. It needs to kind of become better in order to kind of work better for us. That brings me to design is a way of life, right? It's a part of all the choices we make. It changes everything, okay? Now take, for example, all of us, all of you being one designer for yourselves, okay? My recommendation to all of you, ask questions. Because with the answers, you'll know what's working. You'll know what you want and what you don't want. You know what you need and what you don't need. I think that lies at the core of everything that we do. Ask the right questions. Because you never know, you'll stumble upon an answer. And I am rounding up, and I'd like to round up with the idea that there is a designer in every one of us. There is going to be something at some point in your life that you create or you design for yourself. And don't shut that thought out. Ask the questions. There's no such thing as a bad question. Ask questions, even if it's stupid, even if you feel foolish about it. I think the important thing is that you keep thinking and you keep asking yourself and you keep asking others, because that's when you stumble upon the answers. And please know, all through history, all the best, the most fun inventions are a result of difficulties or accidents. And I think that is something that we all need to sort of grow into, accept that about yourself and celebrate it.